where strategy gaming meets good vibes. No stress, just critical moves. Welcome to the Critical Moves podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm here with Tim.
Hey everyone, how you doing?
And Shane.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And I'm Joe, and I'm from the Millennial Binge podcast. We today are going to talk about fun versus realism in our strategy games. But before that, what have you guys been playing this week? Tim, what are you playing this week?
Oh, I've been playing Beyond All Reason. There's a pretty big tournament coming up this weekend, €1,500 prize pool, and training for that. So wish me luck.
Good luck. What about you, Shane?
Oh, I'm just doing my usual. I've just been playing War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. I've got a long-term play-by-email campaign going on. Although it's been going kind of slow lately. The guy I'm playing with has been out of the country. So I've been doing a little bit of flight sim on the side, not necessarily strategy game related, but it's just a fun hobby that I do to pass the time.
Nice. I've been doing Stellaris myself. I got back into it. Got an idea for an Earth-based Imperium of Man playthrough. So I'm like role-playing Imperium of Man, but doing it from Earth. Having some fun so far. We're not too far in because I play it kind of slow. I weigh every decision. I'm pausing nonstop. So, but we're having a lot of fun this week. We just got some neighbors that are mad at us for expanding too fast. And I saw a juicy planet that had some primitives. But I'm the Imperium. So I had to take it.
I've never played that game, but it sounds interesting. Is this online? Is it single player? I mean, I'm probably showing some. I don't know what it is. Like, is it online, offline? Give me the TLDR on this game real quick.
So it's both, really. I mean, you can do either way. You can play it online, or you can play it single player. But the big thing with Stellaris, I mean, it's a space 4X game, but it's very narrative and story based, and it's been out so long that it has just a wide range of mods. So really anything you wanted to do, you're like, oh, I want to do Warhammer 40k, you can do that. You want to do Star Wars, you can play a Star Wars game. Star Trek, any of them you can do. I just so happen to say, give me a blank galaxy and I'm going to envision Earth going a weird way and becoming like the Imperium of Man, and I'm just sort of role-playing that way is what I'm doing. But there's just a wide range of mods. You can make almost any game you want with it. It's such a big game, we're going to do a podcast on the company someday, I'm sure, because that's really all their games are like this now. Yeah, for sure. We're going to have to get into it. Okay, let's just get to the main topic now. Fun versus realism. Although I think we all agree you can have both. But let's talk about games where there's a delicate balance of historical versus ahistorical. Why don't you start us off, Shane? What do you think? Do you have any games you think of when you think of historical versus ahistorical and keeping that balance?
Oh, definitely. So, my YouTube channel and what I do is pretty kind of narrow focus when it comes to strategy games. I've played a lot of strategy games over the years, but I'm really into turn-based, war-based strategy games, a lot of the Gary Grigsby stuff. So a lot of games that come to mind, because it's my niche, is like War in the Pacific, War in the East, War in the West. These are all historical games, but they have a component where you can play them as if you're just trying to role play the war all over again and win and lose the exact same way that the actual Allies or Axis forces did. Or you can go off script, which I like to do, where it's a historical game, but you play it ahistorically. And I honestly love that aspect of these kind of games. So basically any of the Gary Grigsby turn-based, war-based strategy games are going to have a historical or ahistorical way of playing them. And that's kind of what I'm into right now.
Now, when those games go off the rails for you and you start making your own history, does that suspend your disbelief, or is that what you're there for?
Yeah, that's what I'm there for. So I'll give you a great example from the game I'm playing right now, War in the Pacific. And, I don't want to keep referencing one game, but it's so massive that, it can keep you occupied for years. So basically, the way that game works is that you typically are going to play like a grand campaign, which is December 7th, 1941 until the end. Now, there's two ways you can play it. You can start it where you just do what's called a historical first turn, where the scenario is written so that everything happens on day one, just like it did in a real war, where the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. They land in Malaya. They do all the stuff they do on December 7th, and it's predetermined for you, and it just plays out. And then you pick it up from there, and you just try to play with what you got. That's a historical first turn start. That's great, but quite honestly, the real Japanese in World War II were not very well optimized for what they were trying to do. They had stuff scattered all over the place. They had infantry divisions that were all over the world and not combined. There's a case to be made that there may have been better places for the Kido Butai, the Japanese carrier task force. They could have hit something better. They could have done something else. And I don't really want to play that because I already know how that goes, right? I already know how December 7th goes. I want to do something different. So the way I play the game is there's an ahistorical way where you can create your own first turn as a Japanese. And you can do basically anything you want. And yes, you're going to have to suspend disbelief big time because you could theoretically send your Japanese carrier task force to hit ships in Sydney Harbor in Australia on turn one. Is that historical? Absolutely not. Do you have to suspend disbelief? Absolutely, because it's highly inconceivable that the Japanese can sail their entire fleet all the way down to the southeastern side of Australia without being detected. The Pearl Harbor thing was crazy enough, but to do something like that is more or less impossible. But it spices things up and it changes things, and it's based on a historical everything. The order of battle and all the stuff they got is still the same, but it's an ahistorical start, and it just changes the game and it gives you something different, and that's the way I like to play it.
Yeah, that does sound cool. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so the issue though is that if the game allows you to do something that you feel would be impossible in real life, such as sailing all the way to Sydney undetected and not being opposed, then that's where the realism in the game breaks down, I would say.
Yes, for sure. And then one thing that has to be made clear with your opponent, because these are all human players that I'm talking about, you have to, a lot of these games, because you could go off the rails very quickly with this game if you just start doing that kind of thing. So both players are going to have to sit down and discuss house rules that you have to just honor system abide by. And there are some that are in place that would prevent that kind of a first turn start where the Japanese are hitting Sydney. There's all kinds of different rule packages that are out there in the community where people will adopt for that campaign. So you got to pre-decide that before you start, because some of your allied opponents are not going to be cool with that sort of thing. So they're going to give you guidelines like you can't go below this hex line, or you have to be within this many hexes of a friendly base before you can launch an attack. It's called like a deep attack. I like to have.
But so then to me, that's then like a flaw in the game's mechanics that should be addressed. And I think if you address that, then I think Hearts of Iron 4 multiplayer has exactly the same thing, where you can go very ahistorical, but then it kind of breaks the game down a bit. And then there's house rules as well. And there's a very similar way, I guess, even though it's I'm sure a very different game. But then I feel like that's a flaw from the game. And it should allow you different choices. Like okay, you're not striking Pearl Harbor because in the end it turned out to be a bad choice, but it would allow you other realistic choices instead, and that's the interesting part, I think.
Well, I kind of like the ability to have the autonomy to decide that for myself and my opponent. Right. It should let me do it if I want it to. If both parties agree that that's okay, then I don't think it's game breaking if everybody's on the same page and agrees right off the bat that that's okay for them. If they don't, then you adjust. Like if your opponent says, no, I'm not cool with that sort of a thing, you need to keep it limited to this AOR, then you do that, or you find another opponent. So you don't have, if both parties agree to break the game, that's on them. If one of them doesn't want to do it, then you don't do it. So I like having the ability to do that. But if you got to be on the same page with your opponent, and if you're not, then you do something that's a little more reasonable. And I've done both ways.
That's interesting. So is that game single player or multiplayer?
Yeah, so you can play
Okay.
against the AI, which is absolutely garbage, and I don't recommend it. It's great for learning the mechanics of the game and beating up on and making yourself feel good. But the AI is like early 2000s AI, and it's more or less based off a script, so it's gonna not keep up with a real human player. Now, I prefer to play the game against humans, where the amount of variability is unlimited because they can do whatever they want, and then you have to try to predict what they're going to do, and sometimes you get it wrong. So I only recommend playing these Gary Grigsby games against other humans because the AI is just will always fall short.
So what ways does that game that you're talking about stick to the realism then? So you talked about all the ways where it's ahistorical, but where's the realism come in?
Okay, so that's kind of going to be contingent on the scenario creators, whoever builds the scenarios that you're going to play, and they can be edited in an editor. But the game ships with a couple scenarios that are more or less World War II, from start to finish. And where the game really shines is the order of battles, the ships, the squadrons, the ground forces. If the scenario editor does a good job putting those in, you're playing with real world historical units that existed. And for example, the Japanese have a set list of ships that they can build from start to finish. You can kind of play with the economy and speed some up and slow some down or not build some, but you can't with a scenario that's predetermined, which you typically start with. I can't build 20 extra aircraft carriers that they never got. It won't let you. It's not an option. So you're kind of stuck with their historical order of battle, and that's what I like. So I want to go off the rails and do my own strategy, but I have to play within the confines of what they actually had and work with that. So that's where you got the historical versus ahistorical component of it. I have to work with their order of battle, and that's all I'm going to get. But I can use them the way I want to use them and not the way that they did. And that's kind of the angle that I prefer playing my strategy games, where I have realistic historical units that are based on reality, but I get to do them, play with them the way that I want and use them the way that I want.
That makes sense. Okay, Tim, what game comes to you when you think of managing that historical versus ahistorical?
Yeah, so to me, I would say that's a bit less interesting. This question even of historical versus ahistorical, in the sense that to me, strategy is about making decisions. And I guess I don't want to replay someone else's decisions from history, even though I like to play games set in history. I want to make my own choices, exactly like you said, Shane. And then when I think about something like that, I'm thinking about something like Victoria Tree, where I'm thinking of, let's say I'm transported into that time period and I'm set before certain decisions. I think it's really nice if, one, I'm set in front of decisions similar to people of that time. And secondly, if I do make those decisions, is the outcome realistic? Is the outcome of my decision then like, okay, this is pretty much what I expected to happen after making this decision? Or maybe it's unexpected, but then I know why it's unexpected because of this factor, that factor that I had not foreseen, and okay. And it makes sense to me. And then what I really like about something like Victoria Tree is that it's a little bit of a history lesson in not what happened. It's not historical because it's a simulation where you can do anything. So you're not going to learn about events and facts like you would in a history book. And I've never been too interested in that anyway. But you're put in front of decisions where you kind of empathize with people from then, and maybe empathize with people who did things that you would find morally apprehensive even. And you're put in front of decisions, and because of everything that's put in front of you, you're making similar decisions to what people did for similar reasons. And I feel like that teaches you history so much more than learning a date or the name of a place or a general or something like that.
I love that game also, and it actually takes a lot of heat. A lot of people actually don't like Victoria 3, or at least that's what I gather from Reddit. But I love that game. I haven't played it in a while, but I learned a lot from those Paradox games also in a different way. I live, I'm in America, the middle of America, and I feel like my country, a lot of people are really poor at geography. Not me, not me. I know where everything is because I've stared at maps for a long time. You know, my wife will be watching the news and she'll be like, oh, you know, I don't quite know where Vietnam is. And I'm like, oh, Da Nang? I know where that is. I know right where that is. Yeah, I've been there.
I think a lot of people talk about gamification as lesson, and I think it's the other way around. Like a game can be a history lesson rather than a history lesson becoming a game.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've learned so much from those games. And Victoria 3, Crusader Kings, those are the ones I think of too. And I think of Crusader Kings, and they obviously try to make it realistic, but there's so much suspended realism in those games, because if they made it realistic, nobody would have fun. They'd be like, oh, my wife on the game got pregnant 8 times and 7 of them died.
So I'm not so sure about that. I think that it's moving in a direction towards realism. And if we think about older strategy games, I think there's a lot of gamifications there, you know. And as time moves on and as people become more skilled in developing games, and as the computers that we use to play these games become more capable, we're able to run more complex simulations. That doesn't mean the game has to be more complex itself to play. It can be a simple game to play and to learn, but everything that's happening behind the scenes is more complex to, one, develop, and two, to run on a computing machine.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess my game that I'll talk about then is... Gosh, I don't want to talk about Victoria 3. You stole mine, you jerk. I guess I can talk about Crusader Kings then. I mean, it's one of my most played games, and I love those games. And I do think they've done their best to model as well as they can, right? To model the systems. Like, this is what it would be like to be a count. And I think they've done a decent enough job, but still, I still sometimes, you know, when they do the adventurer and you can just start as a random nobody, and within 20 to 30 years, you could be a duke if you're really working at it. There's a little bit of suspended belief in there, but I do like it. I do really enjoy it when that happens, if that makes sense. I do like the system.
I think there's a couple things that bother me, I guess, in a lot of these Paradox games. It's things like mana. This is like a common phrase used to kind of negatively connote some of the aspects of the game, where you have like this resource that slowly ticks up and then you have to spend it, and it feels a little bit like magic power, that like mana that you have to regenerate to do things. But these are like abstractions used to not overcomplicate the game, I think. But I think it comes with iterations, and these developers are learning over time how to do these well. And I think you can make something complex in the background, but then simple in the foreground. And I think it's really difficult to do. You need a lot of skill and experience to do that. I think mana is a bad mechanic, but better mechanic than what was before as an abstraction of a complex topic.
So Imperator had some sort of mana, right? Imperator Rome had something. I think Europe.
I think almost all Paradox games have that.
Yeah, Stellaris has Unity. So I think that would count as a mana type thing. But does Crusader Kings, what would Crusader Kings be? I can't really think of what theirs would be.
So you have your lord has.
Oh, you've got your bloodline points.
Yeah, exactly.
Or your dynasty points. I forget what they're called, but that's what it would be, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Your dynasty points are the mana you're building up. They hid that one from me. They snuck that one past me. Good for them. Okay, now let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about trying to chase that realism. Tim, I know you have some thoughts on that. Why don't you start us off?
Well, for example, I think there's always that kind of developer that has this idea about, I'm going to make this something super realistic, and I'm going to imitate reality or something like that. And sometimes that can be forced way too much, and you get some weird gimmicky stuff. Like there's a game coming out called King's Order, and it's about sending orders to your armies, and then you have to send a messenger, and then the messenger can be intercepted, and then the army doesn't move at all and everything like that. But then it centers the entire game around that. And I don't see myself playing that for 100 hours or even half that. It feels a bit gimmicky and a bit too cheap. And I think that chasing realism can be a real trap. As much of a fan as I am of feeling like I'm in a simulation and I'm feeling like this is real and everything like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You get to the point where you're like, this isn't fun. I know it's realistic, but I'm not having fun now.
And the number one rule in making a video game should always be, is this fun? That rule trumps anything else. Is the reason why you're playing a video game is fun. And okay, realism can add to the fun. It should not subtract from the fun.
Absolutely. I can't remember the name of it, but I had a friend of mine convince me to play an MMO 15 years ago. I wish I could remember what it was called. But it was one of those ones that was chasing realism, like, and like you needed so many materials to make just a stick, to make a staff. You had to get all these materials, and you could only have one character, and he killed his character he'd been playing for 100 hours to come play with me, and I quit after 30 minutes. And he was really mad at me. But it wasn't fun. I mean, he got a kick out of the realism, so I guess it is for some people, but I just could not handle it. I'll have to look it up. Oh, well. What do you think, Shane? What do you think about games that are trying to chase realism?
Listen, I love realistic stuff. I like historical stuff. I'm all about it. But you guys already kind of hit the nail on the head. If it's so realistic that it's not fun anymore, then I don't want to play it. And I'll give you an example of, again, I don't mean to circle back to my thing that I always do with these war games, but obviously there's always going to be a winner and a loser in a real war. And typically the winner wins by a lot and the loser loses by a lot. If I want to play a war game like that, or a strategy game where it's so realistic, like there is absolutely no conceivable way for me to have any kind of chance to be competitive or maybe even win when, kind of changing the outcome of reality a little bit, I don't really want to play that because that's not fun. I don't want to play a game where I'm just going to get my butt kicked the entire time and I'm just playing a simulator where I just recreate the butt kicking that the real fractions received. You got to find a balance between realistic and playability, and sometimes it means you got to kind of bump and fudge a little bit for the bad guys so they have more chance to be competitive. And if I'm playing a game that doesn't exist, or to some extent that there's some sort of fudging of the numbers so the bad guys have a chance, I'm probably not going to enjoy it. It's just I don't want to do that because I'm just going to get my butt kicked, and for what?
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the games I think of in that manner, we already touched on it on this podcast, but Victoria 3 is one of those games where it's almost like they set it up to be realistic, but then they know, we don't care if it's realistic after this. We want to model pops and their consumption habits, but that's really the only thing we want to keep realistic. We're okay with Langfang in China becoming one of the top 10 countries in the world. We're okay with making a system where that can happen. We're okay with nobody wanting to play Great Britain because they're too easy. We're okay with Haiti being able to say no to France, and France just for some reason never doing anything about it. We're okay with making that game because we know the players want to suspend disbelief so much that they're okay with having low realism once the game starts. Or at least that's the way I think of a game like Victoria 3.
So one other game that I really like for the realism is Terra Invicta, where I feel like it's like a huge simulation of Earth and space. And then you get to make decisions. For example, you can get into control of certain countries, and then you choose where you put that spending. And what I really thoroughly enjoyed about that is that I didn't have to look up what each category of things I could spend in will exactly do and how much percentage that will change, and that I felt I could play that game intuitively, and it gave me the results that I was expecting from my intuition. And I thought that's brilliant. If you can really, you don't have to look into the tiny little details, but like it's a simulation so complex and so well done that I can play on a very high level, and then it simulates it well enough that you have like you don't have to read all the small fine print and this gives me 5%, but this gives me 7% over more turns, so should I be doing this? No, you don't even think about that. It's a fully simulated environment. And Terra Invicta, this gives me like great amount of pleasure. And that's a lot what I think about when I think about realism. Not so much the historical versus the ahistorical, but simply, is this simulated well enough? And then I have other examples of games where that's done really poorly. I don't know, have you guys had like frustrations like this where you're behaving in a certain way in a video game and then the game completely derails that and you feel, this shouldn't have happened? Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I want to back you up real quick on Terra Invicta. I played that game on release and I loved it. It's such a long game though, which is fine, but I want to call it a slog, but it's a fun slog, if that makes sense. Like, I'm enjoying every minute of the
there's still some flaws in
game.
it, but
yeah,
there's still some flaws in it that needs polishing, but it's absolutely a blast of a game. Yeah,
and I thought it did space so well.
It did.
No one else even comes close in my mind of simulating.
And it's incredibly realistic.
Yes,
it's incredibly realistic. The space, like it takes you forever to go anywhere in space, but it's still done well, and I'm really impressed with it.
Yeah, I found one of the best ways to win fights is to just load up my big ship, my big slow ship with as many missiles as I can, and hope I can survive. You know.
And that's what's cool about it too. It's realistic and it allows you like a huge variety of play. Like you can build your own ships in like very like Lego kind of way. Like you have lots of components that you can put it together. Distant Worlds is another one that allows you to do that even better than Terra Invicta. And that's really cool, where everything is simulated. And that's what I like when I'm thinking about realism.
And you get into a fight over India. Like a knockdown fight with another faction over it, trying to take it over, you know? Shane, you would like it, Terra Invicta. I know you would. So if you decide to take a break and expand out, I think that should be your next one.
To the future.
Yeah, I think so. Everything I've been listening to about this game sounds really cool. So I'll definitely put that on my short list of other things to play. Eventually I'll really start branching out. But, with my YouTube channel, the way it's kind of structured right now, the bread and butter is this War in the Pacific game, and it's the point of the campaign that I'm at with this other player that I'm with. It's pretty exciting, and there's a lot of action. So I kind of want to push through that first, and once that kind of gets into a lull where the war is settling down a little bit, and we're not having like action-packed turns every single day, I can start looking at other games, because I just don't want to let off the throttle with it where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much away from what Tim's going to say next, but do you struggle to explain how exciting it is to people who don't play video games?
Talking to me or Tim? Or
you. Like when you're like, my action-packed turns.
Oh, yeah. Especially at work. I try to explain this stuff to my coworkers, and I'm like, we had a great turn last day. The Kido Butai hit a bunch of battleships in Colombo and Ceylon, and I sank all of them. And he's like, that's cool, dude. That's great. I'm like, hey, nice chat. And yeah.
Yeah, I've been there. I know exactly what you mean, but it's so satisfying when you. Yeah. I feel like it's like you're hyper focused on something, and that's so incredibly satisfying when you can. I feel like you can drown yourself into that environment and get really into it. That's a great pleasures of these strategy games. I feel like.
Yeah, my wife will be like, "Why are you staring so hard at that map? What are you doing? Is that a painting game?" It's like, kind of.
Painting the map, changing it to my color.
Exactly. Abstractly, yes. It is a painted all blue game. Okay, so, Tim, jump into the bad examples.
Yeah, no. Would I get frustrated sometimes? I don't know if you played Total War Rome 1. Same thing with like Heroes of Might and Magic 3. It's like this turn-based game. You have your town, you have your army, and then you leave your town with your army. And yeah, okay, you press next turn, and then the enemy army just walks right past your army, like right next to it. Doesn't give a care in the world, and just walks into your town, and that's it. And it's like, man, like why is my army not stopping that? And then that's like these major flaws that some limitations of these games can have, such as, for example, turn-based games. In this example, is like, no, this would not have happened, and then you feel kind of cheated by this game, by this design. Like, yeah, you feel cheated. That's the best way of putting it that I can think of.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think of Crusader Kings 3, where for some reason your allies won't just go take a city with you to end the war.
Oh,
Instead, they're just going to go all over the place. Or you're like, we've got the numbers. Why don't you come join my stack and we'll go take out their stack and we can all go home. But instead, they split all up for some insane reason. And Paradox is just like, we know it's a problem. We can't do anything about it, basically. And that just drives me nuts. So much that sometimes I just don't even want to play that game because it's like, this makes no sense to me.
And then I guess there's more arcade games as well, like, for example, Command and Conquer Generals. You have this resource called supplies, and you have to collect it and bring it to your base, and like every faction has their own way, like some laborers or some trucks or whatever. And then I'm thinking, like, why can't you just build your base on top of the supplies? Like, why do you have to build your base at a certain distance from the supplies, and then you have to go and get it? Like, I get it, it's like an arcade-ish game, and it doesn't take itself so seriously. But to me, like, that feels a bit lazy. And like, come on, you could have thought of something a little bit better than this.
You know, any game, you reminded me of this, any game that's supposed to be like a 4X or something that won't let me decide where the cities go, same sort of thing. I'm just like, I don't want to play this game. They're like, oh, well, we've got preset cities for you that you can go out and discover. No. That's not what I'm looking for. I want to find the perfect city myself. To me, that is, rather than having the same cities in every map, always. That's always something that drives me nuts when I play those games. What about you, Shane? Do you have any thoughts on
first,
games that don't do it right?
I want to go back to something that Tim mentioned. It's kind of off topic here, but since you said it, Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Are we talking like the old one from like 20 years ago? Or is there something more current?
Actually, they're making a new version.
Which was the one you're referring to? Is it like really old from a long time ago?
Yeah, it is, and that's also what I'm talking about when I think with as developers make new games and we learn about new mechanics and everything like that. Like, we're moving more towards simulation and less towards arcade. Because like in the newer Total War versions, and I believe in the Heroes of Might and Magic versions as well, you have like your army has an aura around it where the enemies can't pass through unless they're fighting you. So they're learning like new band-aid solutions for these annoyances. Yeah. But yeah, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is still like it's still played today like a lot. There's still tournaments going on.
I just looked it up.
There was one not long ago.
I just looked it up, and I remember playing this in high school on my computer, 1999, 2000, and I loved that game. So you really kind of reminded me about it when you mentioned it. I can't believe it's even being talked about. It's 24 years old right now, and people still talk about that game. That's cool.
You can still play it. You open it up right now. You can launch it up and play it. There's like community-led expansions as well that's being made at the moment, and it's a beautiful game.
I loved it back then. I loved it 24 years ago when I was like 15 years old playing it. Thanks for reminding. I probably went off the rails on this, guys, but you just kind of sparked my memory on that game, and I really liked it. So thanks for mentioning it to me. I don't really have anything else to say about this particular topic. I'm just really excited to hear about this game again.
Well, Actually, the last thing I wanted to touch on with this realism idea is that to me, realism doesn't exactly mean it has to be historic and exact. And like you can have magic and monsters and so on, and still aim towards a certain realism in that, okay, you've created this world with these rules, and please let it be consistent within the boundaries of these rules and make me feel like if I take actions and decisions within the confines of this world, that they feel realistic. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, great example of this, and I'm glad you brought this up. Now, these games aren't perfect, but the Total Warhammer games there's so much of that in there, but they're doing their best. If we had this mix, how would it look? Like, they really take into account how big a model is, how much a model weighs. An ogre that's charging gets benefits from being so big. If you get dwarves and humans to work together, the humans, their guns, they work really good as range because they can shoot right over the head of the short dwarves. And so you don't have to worry about a checkerboard formation. You can just have them shoot over the dwarf's head because the dwarves are short. That's a nice touch to me. That's a good way of trying to sneak some realism into a game that has a lot of silliness in it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here with us. Tim, do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, like I said, there's a tournament of Beyond All Reason. It's only the best RTS game out there, and it's got a pretty big prize pool with some teams competing for it. So check it out on Twitch on Beyond All Reason this weekend.
I just started playing that. Highly recommend. Shane, what do you got to plug today?
Well, I guess I'll just give myself an obligatory plug to my own YouTube channel. If you're into this wargaming stuff that I like to do, turn-based strategy, Gary Grigsby stuff, or you just want to kind of chill and watch an MD-11 fly around, you can go check out Jochen Heiden's Combined Fleet Headquarters. Good luck spelling that, but it's on YouTube. I got plenty of subscribers. You'll see my channel, so come check it out if you want to see that game. It's pretty fun.
Okay, and I'm Joe, and I guess I'll just plug my podcast. I've got Millennial Binge Podcast where we're watching old school movies. We are just finishing up our first season, and we're getting into season 2. We were going to do all Tom Cruise movies for season 2, but I think what we're going to do instead is plucky teenager movies. We're going to start first with, I don't know if we decided what we're going to start first, but we'll be looking for stuff like Not Another Teen Movie and Can't Hardly Wait, She's All That, things like that. So we're excited to get into season 2, and want to thank everybody for joining us, the Critical Moves podcast, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.